Tackling youth unemployment remains a priority here in Korea, especially as the country faces one of the fastest aging vets population among OECD members. So what are the challenges to youth employment? What are the broader implications of a shrinking youth workforce? And what are some solutions to tackle youth unemployment? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we address Korea's low youth employment rate, including its causes, consequences and potential countermeasures. For more, I have Professor Kim Sei-wan at Ewha Womans University live on the line. Professor Kim, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me today.
I also have Professor Suh Chan-seok at Chung-Ang University live on the line as well. Professor Suh, it's a pleasure.
Great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Kim, what is the status of Korea's youth labor market as we speak?
First of all, it should be pointed out that the labor market for young workers has been declining over the last 10 years. In easy words, we can say that it becomes more and more difficult for young workers to find decent jobs in Korea. The unemployment rate, which is the ratio between number of unemployed and number of economically active population, and the most well-known barometer of labor market is about 2.6% for all age cohorts. But it is much higher at over 6% for young workers from 15 years old to 29 years old. And from the beginning of this year, the situation gets worse. The size of young workers' employment actually decreases, while the size of old workers' employment increases. In February of this year, the young workers' employment declined by over 120,000 compared to the same month last year. And that was the largest decline in the last 2 years.
Right, I see. And Professor, so how do you explain the social setup that continues to challenge youth employment here in the country?
Yeah, among many social factors, it is time to focus on how low birth rate began to influence our economy. So as Professor Kim mentioned, the number of the elderly in the workplace actually increased in the same time frame, showing that our aging structure is changing. The population of the elderly is increasing, the number of young people is decreasing, and by the way, we have the highest poverty rate for the elderly among all OECD countries. So there are reasons for the elderly to find jobs, even low quality ones, when the young want to start their professional career from a decent position. So that may be the social setup that leads to these problems in youth employment.
I see. And staying with that, Professor, so what do you believe is also behind perhaps the growing presence of the so-called NEET group here in the country?
Yeah, the NEET group. Yeah, the NEET group has dramatically increased during the pandemic, actually. So among the many negative consequences of COVID-19, I suspect that young people have increasingly become less social, have less social interaction, and started to lose passion to proceed their professional career in this challenging social environment. But another factor I want to talk about is a mismatch between their ideal and the reality. In other words, the mismatch between the jobs they want to have and the jobs that are actually provided in the job market. So young people are generally well-trained, well-educated on average, and they want a high-quality job with enough salary, a stable position, and a favorable environment for them. But the jobs that are actually being provided is temporary ones, not enough compensation, and involving interaction with some authoritarian senior members.
Professor Kim, there are critics who've taken issue with policies that simply promote financial assistance as part of efforts, of course, to tackle youth unemployment. What are your thoughts?
Well, in economics, we say that compensation to the unemployed people should be jobs, not financial support, like providing cash or voucher to buy goods and services. Over the difficult situation of young workers, providing financial support would lessen the economic pain from not working. However, it should be noted that it weakens young workers' willingness to search and find a job in the long run. And the financial support also worsens government's budget deficit situation, so it can't be continued over a longer period. Instead, government should pay more attention to promote economic growth and construct market-friendly environment for private corporations to generate more decent jobs. That means we should remember that it is private sector, like private corporations, that generates decent jobs for young workers, not the government.
Right, I see. And staying with that, Professor Kim, what are your thoughts on providing perhaps more training for our young workers instead of providing them simply with financial support?
Well, providing more training is a very important factor to improve young workers' productivity and finding job possibility in the future. Therefore, government and local government and universities and high schools together can construct the training system, actually lifelong training system, to improve workers' productivity with more skills, more education, and more experiences. That would be a very important policy to promote young workers' employment in the short run.
Right. Professor, so with regard to young workers who are actually in the workforce at the moment, a new phenomenon appears to be taking shape post-pandemic, if I may, called quiet quitting. Do tell us a bit about this phenomenon and its implications, perhaps, with regard to the young workers' perception of the work itself that they're doing.
Yeah, actually in the United States, there has been this anti-work movement among young workers. So it seems to be a global phenomenon actually during the pandemic. Pandemic actually provided a unique opportunity to think about the meaning of work for us. And especially due to inflation and rising housing prices, as well as stock prices, people started to realize that the work they provide is actually devaluated compared to the value of financial wealth. So even when they provide their labor in their workplaces, they keep thinking about leaving. They try to find ways to leave the job market and earn money through financial capital. So this may lead to this phenomenon of quiet quitting and keep trying to find ways to leave the job market.
Professor, so the idea of quiet quitting also refers to the, could be linked to the phrase at your wage, as in you're not going to be doing any more, you'll be doing just the amount of work that you're being paid for. Keeping that in mind, Professor, so do you suppose there are ways perhaps to encourage young workers to perhaps engage in their work with more enthusiasm or passion?
Yeah, it's hard, but as the talented young population that I meet at my university, they actually have options to quit their job and wait, find new opportunities, better opportunities, or even proceed a career elsewhere in the United States or Europe after earning a professional degree in their country. So Korean students have enough potential. So for corporate sector, I hope that they like to follow global trend. In terms of corporate culture, I also hope that they can meet the expectation of the younger population. So yes, it is not very easy in South Korea that has very different labor structure, but what the corporate can still try to do to recruit talented young employees would be to change their corporate culture, provide enough compensation, and to change the work assignment and evaluation system more individualistically, because this younger generation is generally more individualistic.
Professor Kim, what, in the meantime, could you tell us about the broader economic repercussions of a shrinking youth workforce in the country?
Well, as Professor Suh explained, it became a very important phenomenon, particularly to Korean young workers. On one side of the labor market, quite a few young workers don't have jobs. But on the other side of the labor market, many young workers quit jobs because they are pursuing their own lifestyle and value of living. That makes lots of confusions and inefficiencies in both the public sector and private sector. Therefore, many corporations' consistent business framework is hurt by these young workers' unexpected many quests. This phenomenon represents young workers changing attitudes on working. It means that they don't just work for a paycheck. Instead, they value both the quality of the life and money, which is totally different from their parents' generation. But regarding this respect, employers or corporations are adjusting quickly by providing life quality benefits like longer leave of absence to young workers and other related benefits, like providing supports on like sports activities and so on.
And stay with the professor. So I understand this next question may be quite tough, but what do you propose with regard to the corporate sector? I mean, what should they do to maintain perhaps young workers from quiet quitting, or I mean to refrain or keep away young workers from quiet quitting or quitting altogether, of course?
Yeah, this is related to what I just explained about how the corporate sector or the society can try to embrace younger population, what we call MZ generation, who is more post-materialistic, I would say. Previously, workers only focused on material values on average. They wanted simply higher salary and benefit and compensation. But nowadays, these younger workers increasingly move towards less material. Think about the balance between life and work, and they want to find the meaning of their work. So what the corporate can do is to change the current corporate culture and to change it in a way that people with more post-materialistic and individualistic people can more easily adjust to their environment.
Right, so a corporate culture that allows a balance between work and personal life then?
That's what I would like to emphasize.
Right. Professor Kim, what do you propose the government then should do to ensure a productive work environment for Korea's youth, of course?
It looks to me that today's young workers are more productive than their parents' generation. On average, young workers are more flexible enough to be adjusted to new situation, and also they speak foreign languages well. These are very basic fundamentals of labor productivity. And these fundamentals are highly related to young workers' value of life at the same time. So for improving these fundamentals, government can provide more incentives on private corporations, new treatments for raising young workers' productivity. I think one good example for that is paid absence of living for a year or for a half year, which is accepted by many public corporations, broadcasting corporations, and large private corporations.
Professor Kim, staying with what the government can do, this is a very random question, but of course related to our topic. What are your thoughts about enforcing perhaps a 4-day work week to encourage younger workers to engage in their work much more actively when they are, of course, in the work arena?
Well, that is a good suggestion, which is working only 4 days per week. But that, as we know, that can hurt the fundamentals of all industries and all economies, labor production. Therefore, for implementing 4 days working per week, the labor productivity should be improved. That means, as we talked about, particularly the young workers are working less, but they are producing more goods and services in terms of quantity. At the same time, in terms of the quality, they are producing higher level goods and services. That should be something guaranteed before, I think, implementing 4 days working per week.
Right, of course. And Professor Suh, what do you suggest to strengthen government policies in support of the country's youth employment?
For the government to provide incentives to the corporates as Professor Kim mentioned, seems to be a great idea. From a different angle, I think it may be tough for the Korean government, but the Korean government should do a little bit more to produce nascent and decent jobs here in South Korea, not elsewhere. Many governments, including the US, are now adopting the so-called reshoring policies to strengthen their middle class, to bring new jobs in their country. So now there are many backlash from the old neoliberal globalization pattern. I personally think that our government should also do a little bit more to not simply to praise the corporate sector for investing and building new factories in the United States or even in Japan, but do a little bit more, give more incentive for the corporate sector for them to come back from China or Vietnam to South Korea to bring new jobs.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Kim, moving forward, the country's Minimum Wage Commission, it's holding its third session to set next year's wage rate, of course. What are the main issues of contention there?
Well, before talking about government's minimum wage decision with labor unions and employers, I have to point out that government's labor market policies, major market policies are under confusion. Not long ago, in April, there was a confusion over extended work week proposal by government. The confusion continues over government's initial plan for an extended work week, even after President Yoon proposed to keep weekly working hours below 60, which is taking a step back from the original plan of allowing a maximum of 69-hour work week. Along with this working hour confusion, the minimum wage decision among workers, employers, and government is under a bumpy road. Yesterday, the largest labor union walked away from a communication channel with government in a move that I think escalates tensions between workers and government. This is the first time in 7 years that the government union has withdrawn from the discussion body. The labor union actually wants the minimum wage per hour to be 12,000 won or 2.51 million won per month, which is almost 25% increase from last year. This high rise of minimum wage is not likely to be accepted by employers as of now. So there should be more room for Korean government to negotiate between employers and employees in the future.
And keeping in mind what Professor Kim has just said, Professor Suh, what are your prospects with regard to next year's minimum wage?
Yeah, I may have a slightly different opinion from Professor Kim in that I personally think that minimum wage should be higher. In the case of the United States, of course, it was not due to minimum wage policy, but after the pandemic, there has been labor shortage. So workers have increasingly earned more, even in the service sector. What's happening now is that even with this high inflation rate, even when the federal bank keep increasing the interest rate, the economy is still very strong right now. The consumers keep buying products, and I think the government they are able to find the right what can I say, virtuous circle between increasing minimum wage and consuming more and the economy being stronger. And I hope that the government can find a better way to find the right cycle.
Right, because it remains to be a very daunting challenge. I mean, there was a survey, I believe, last week, Professor Kim, where a number of self-employed people claimed about their prospects of closing shop in the case of a rise in minimum wage. That being said, how severe are the economic hardships faced by self-employed workers here in the country at the moment?
Well, one of the most unique feature of the Korean labor market is self-employers cover almost 25% of total employment. So without considering the economic pains of the self-employers, it is almost impossible to solve the labor market situation and economic growth of the Korea. So I think the hardest hit by the pandemic and the economic recession will be self-employers. They are suffering from higher inflation and higher wages and all ingredients price increases. Because of that, self-employers began to close their shops very quickly these days. According to Statistics Office of Korean government, the self-employers the size of the self-employers number of shops are declining over 5% compared to the last year. So that means that it could be a very important signal that labor market and Korean economy is together declining thanks to the decrease of their business.
Right. Professor Kim, starting July, that's next month, people here in the country will be able to transfer up to $100,000 a year overseas without the requirement of evidentiary papers. And the government says this is all aimed at, of course, to boost investments. What are your thoughts regarding this ease in red tape?
Well, before the COVID pandemic, until 2019, Korean people spent more than 19 trillion won per year in foreign travel, except the air ticket. So that means every year almost 20 trillion won has been saved each year for the last 3 years for Korean general households. So that saved money by not traveling out of the country has been spent much on luxury items, which is called as a revenge consumption or 보복 소비 for the last 3 years. But that was not something healthy consumption, I believe, because a small part of the economy is benefited only from the revenge consumption of the Korean households, like department stores and luxury shops in Korea. So when Korean people are allowed to spend more in foreign countries, that something has a direct and indirect impacts on Korean economy by raising the revenues of the department store that is related to no tariffs shops located in Korea. So I think that triggers more consumptions in the near future by making people to spend more in foreign countries.
Right, I see. Well, I suppose we'll have to wait and see about how that policy unfolds in the future then. Professor Kim, as always, thank you so much for taking my impromptu questions as well as, of course, the questions that we had prepared. And Professor Suh, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. We'll be back same time tomorrow. That is Friday, so do join us then.